Kol omer krav amar ma'ikra, kol habasar chatzir, v'chol chasto ketzitz hasadeh, yavesh chatzir novel tzitz, ki ruach Adonai nashva bo. Achen chatzir ha'am, yavesh chatzir novel tzitz, u'davar Eloheinu yakum li'olam. A voice says, cry out, but I ask, what shall I cry? All flesh is like grass, all of its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower fades, when a wind from God blows upon it. Surely, therefore, people are like grass. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of God endures forever. LeDavid Mizmor, L'Adonai haaretz umloa, tevel v'yoshveva, ki hu al yamim yesada, v'al nehorot yichonaneha. Mi ya'aleh bahar Adonai, umi yakum bimkom kadsho. Neki chapayim uvar levav, asher lo nasa lashav nafshi v'lo nishba lemirma. The earth is the Lord's, with all of its fullness. The world is the Lord's, with all of its inhabitants. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in the holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart. He will receive a blessing from the Lord and a just reward from the God of deliverance. Larry, your father was very, very good at taking situations, as you know, and reducing them to a written document. Some people call these things contracts that are professional or business arrangements. Your dad called a contract a relationship. That's what it was to him, a special type of human relationship. Whether at Park or elsewhere, he drew up contracts, he drew up personnel reports. If we were interviewing someone, he would create interview summaries or evaluations so that we could remember the highs and the lows of the interviews and come to a conclusion as to the best candidate. In each of these instances, your dad was taking the feelings of the group and representing them in a written document. You said he would keep every draft of a written document. He cared about the process. But anyone can tell you that a written document, is only as good as the people involved in it. No matter how good a summary, no matter how good an evaluation or a contract could look great on paper, but it's the parties themselves that determine the relationship. If Larry Wymor was good at getting things down on paper, it was because you could look in Larry's eyes and you felt you could trust him. It's not that he was a good writer, which he was. It's not that he was good at second or third drafts. He was that too. But what the determining factor was, he was a trustworthy and honest and decent human being. That's what made his documents work. It's that he knew he wasn't writing words. He was defining a relationship between people. And he cared about relationships. So much that his work and his volunteering was always about building and sustaining and nurturing relationships. I can turn back the clock to my own life here. I didn't come to Cleveland because I loved the working of the personnel manual. I came here because I was impressed by the people. And I felt I could trust them. And I didn't feel that way everywhere. It was not adversarial, it was cooperative, it was caring, and it was empowering. And Larry, not only when I arrived here, but for many years after that, contributed to that type of atmosphere. As you know, your dad was a face-to-face type of man. Let's talk about it, let's sit about it, let's engage the process with each other. He was not there to pontificate. He truly wanted an exchange between people, a discussion. He wanted to hear you, and then he would listen to you in turn. Proud of his process, but very little ego. He was simply interested in the health of the organization that he represented, and at the same time interested in the individual. I know he was a believer, you two both said he was a believer in the win-win scenario, right? Both parties can walk away with dignity. He was a man of integrity, and that's what he believed in. A soft demeanor, anything that he was involved in, he took care of in a thoughtful and careful way. The only thing you own, he said, is your name. So if you're going to get involved in something that has your name on it, it has to be something that's honest and something you'll be proud of. He was a lawyer. He ran a business. But he could have been, in another lifetime, he could have been a counselor. He could have been a psychologist. He could have been a kindergarten teacher. And of course, he could have owned and managed his own jam and jelly company. Actually, he sort of did, as you know. He loved making jam. He had grown up here in Cleveland. He attended Heights High School and then Case Western Case Western. He was raised in an observant home, Jewishly. He always loved and identified with his Jewishness. He learned Yiddish as a child. He lived with his grandfather. It was the only way to really be able to talk to his grandfather. And so he learned Yiddish that way. He grew up with his sister Ellen, and they shared a comfort level and a wonderful sibling relationship their entire life. And so much of his volunteer life and his volunteer ethic came through these organizations, with Park, with Men's Club, the governance of Park. He won the Center Award at Park, B'nai B'rith. He loved music. He loved the symphony. He played saxophone in high school. I know he brought much of the style that we knew at the synagogue into his home life and into his relationship with the two of you. I know you really discussed issues with your father. You spoke about the pros and cons and what was the right decision, the righteousness of different causes with your father. He wanted discussion, he wanted that reflection, and he wanted a thoughtful result. He was teaching you his take on what it means to be a righteous person. A righteous person thinks about things ahead of time. Boy, is that missing today. Today the pace is frenetic in politics and everything. It's fast. You got to get an answer right now. What's your answer? Yes or no? Give me a sound bite. I need to know what the answer is. There's less and less time in today's world for reflection and for softness. Who in the world goes into situations today thinking a win-win for both sides? Too often we see people wanting to humiliate each other. I hope your dad's style can still work today. I believe it's a world that needs your dad's style more and more as the years go on. As your dad, he always found ways of connecting with you, of sharing even as you pursued your own goals. He gave you space, but he also became part of your journey at the same time. He had almost a childlike curiosity in people and people's stories. He really wanted to know your story. He really wanted to get to know you. Many of your own friends felt a kind of closeness with your dad as a mentor, certainly as a role model. Whether at home or at work or in life, Larry took the time it needed to do things that mattered. Approachable, thinking of the team, thinking of the group, and thinking of the congregation. Compassionate, a teacher always. I know your folks met because your mother needed a ride home, and your dad gave her that ride home. They were very dedicated parents to you. They would do anything for the two of you. Your dad would do anything for you except drive the speed limit, as I understand. I understand he was speed limit challenged, that he had quite a few conversations with the traffic police over many years. I think that would have been the one place where Larry's technique of producing a win-win probably didn't work. I can't imagine your dad succeeding by saying, "Do you really think, officer, giving me that ticket is the right thing to do?" I just don't think it would have. I think Larry saw the good in people always. He thought there was no problem that couldn't be solved, or at least lessened, through face-to-face and people contact. A gentle person. It's interesting the influence a parent can have. He was always very comfortable in the kitchen making things, and that became part of your life. And when you described Jewish genealogy, what did you tell me? You said he got people to remember their bedroom pictures of their past. I think his influence in both of your lives is a very special one. I don't know the cultural background that came through Larry to you. I don't know what he passed on to you in those types of ways, but I know what qualities he passed on to you. Gentleness and pleasantness, thoughtfulness and care, compassion, love of life, love of Jewish life, love of community. And I hope, not only to you, but to people on this earth, I hope he passed on the hopeful attitude that people can trust each other and do right by each other and walk through life with a good name. He lived with a good name, and he died with a good name. Stephen?
It looks much thicker than it really is. Let me begin by saying that I've been struggling with how to speak about my father because his life was so deeply rich and varied. And there are countless stories that I could share about the work he did, about the trips we took, the meals we shared, or the events we attended. But I think the most important thing to talk about are the lessons I learned. Why? Because the phrase that comes to mind over and over in my adult life has often been, "What would Larry do?" Now, that is not to suggest that I always followed his advice, because in fact, he rarely gave advice, unless it was directly solicited. And he even used to joke, "Remember, the advice I give you is worth what you paid for it." But rather, I want to touch on how, by merely being around my dad and observing or engaging with him, one's life was, in fact, my life was and continues to be enriched by him in innumerable ways. The phone would ring, I'd pick it up, and the conversation always began, "Hey, Wymor." Sometimes it was, "Hey, Shlomo," or "Hey, Weinzimmer," but usually just, "Hey, Wymor." It was his caller ID, so to speak. And I would always be glad to hear his voice. I would reply, "Hey, old man," or "Hey, Pops, how's it hanging?" "A little to the left," he'd always say. It was both a reference to his handedness and later in life, a political statement, if you will. He was a lefty, literally and figuratively, and it always made me smile. These conversations were weekly at minimum, and sometimes more frequent than that. And they would last for hours at a time. They began from the time I first went off to college and continued until just about a few years ago. Then they became less frequent, less fulfilling, then frustrating, and ultimately ceasing entirely. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's robbed me of that essential pleasure. But nonetheless, the topics we would discuss would be far-ranging and deep, and yet simultaneously common and banal. Politics, my love life, or lack thereof, philosophy, work, music, art, technology, a bawdy joke. It didn't matter. He was game for all of it. And oftentimes when I tried to end the conversation, he'd invariably find a new topic to dig into. I'd often have to say, "Dad, let's just put a pin in that and pick it up next time." Or, "Dad, isn't it past your bedtime?" And for the last 25 years, I've been living on the West Coast, so that meant he was just raring to keep going even at 2 a.m. Of course, I loved every minute of it. But as most everyone here could attest, Larry was a raconteur of the first order. If you had to do work on an airplane, you had better hope you weren't seated next to him. And in our family, we used to have a joke that Dad could talk to a wall and get a response. But he wasn't just a talker. He didn't just simply talk to hear himself talk. He was a gentle listener and a deep thinker. He didn't talk to fill empty space. He didn't talk because he necessarily had a position he was trying to convince you of. Rather, he talked because he liked to converse, not to lecture. He liked to be engaged with his fellow human beings in the exchange of ideas. Yes, he liked to share, but he liked to learn too. In fact, he used to say to both me and Marcia, "Never sell anyone short. There is always something you can teach someone else." But maybe, and more importantly, he would add, there is always something you can learn from someone else too, no matter who they are. And he met people on their own terms, be they far his junior or senior, richer or poorer, white collar or blue collar, or from every ethnic or racial group, it didn't matter. he could seemingly fit in anywhere, not because he was a chameleon, but because he met you where you stood. Growing up, I never saw him uncomfortable or out of place. He was at home everywhere, and he put people at ease. A friend of mine recently said, "My dad had a gift, not unlike a Buddha." He could simply bring a smile to your face. I remember once as a child being on a family trip in Boston. We had been camping in an RV through New England, and we had stopped in Boston on our way back home, and we stepped into one of the many bookstores in the area, and we quickly all scattered to our respective sections. We'd been living on top of each other in an RV, after all. And when I came back several minutes later to rejoin my father, I saw him engaged in a boisterous and familiar conversation with a woman whom I assumed was a friend of his they had just bumped into in Boston. I remember later asking him, "Dad, who is that woman you were talking to?" And he replied, "I don't know, just someone I struck up a conversation with." I thought to myself at that young age, you can do that? Based on his casual tone, I just assumed, wrongly of course, that they were old friends. But that was Larry. Not to sound too Pollyanna, but a stranger to him was just a friend he hadn't yet met yet. I have yet to master that art myself, but Marcia has it in spades. He could engage people in the most authentic of ways, and you name it, there was rarely a topic in which he wasn't interested. Not as a subject unto itself per se, but because he was an opportunist of sort. An opportunist who was deeply and genuinely fascinated by people. So he took an interest because it was an opportunity for him to make a new friend and to possibly learn something along the way too. A gift indeed. And even if he disagreed with you, he wanted to understand where you might be able to find common ground. I never saw him condescend. I never saw him demean. He could disagree without disparagement. Even when he practiced law and was working on contracts, his goal was to always find a way for both parties to feel as if they had reached consensus. He didn't feel you win by destroying the other side. You win by finding commonality and agreement. He was win-win long before it was a catchphrase. Larry was nothing if not deeply generous. He was philanthropic, yes, but I'm talking about a different type of generosity, a generosity of spirit. I had a friend from college that I met in my senior year, not because we were classmates, but because we both worked at the same bookstore. His name was Warren, and when we met, I knew almost instantly that this would be a lifelong friend. Later in life, when Warren was on a Rhodes Scholarship in Germany, he met and later eventually would marry a Polish woman. I was asked to be best man at his wedding, which, by the way, was going to be held in Poland. My father knew how important this friendship was to me, and so he gave me his frequent flyer miles that he had been hoarding so I could make the trip and attend their nuptials. And he was doing all of this, having never even met Warren, but only having heard me speak fondly of him and listening to endless stories of our misadventures. Now, around this time, he had also been working on our family tree for years, so it was an opportunity for me to set foot in the old country. So away I went. And when I got back, I told him about what it was like to attend an actual Polish wedding in Poland, and how Warren and his new bride took me to the Jewish Institute in Warsaw to look at photos of Kolno, the town where his father was from, and how Warren and I spent a day visiting Auschwitz. Several years later, Warren was then living in Krakow, and my dad was on his way to Poland to attend the March of the Living and make his own pilgrimage to Auschwitz. So in one of our weekly calls, he says to me, "Hey, how do I get in touch with Warren? He's still in Poland, right? Remember, he's never met this man. For him, there was never any question about whether he should try and contact my friend. It was just a matter of how to do it. Forget that nearly every hour of the trip was tightly planned. He was determined to make it happen. He gets back and, of course, tells me how the two had met and how he even got to meet Warren's young son Sam. He was thrilled. Unfortunately, I wasn't there to partake. Then one day I get an email from Warren with a photo attached of my dad and Warren having coffee at a sidewalk cafe in Krakow. There they were, my two best friends, smiling ear to ear with my friend's young son Sam in tow, all of them seemingly up to no good. Now, my dad didn't do this out of a sense of obligation to me, but rather, I'm guessing, as another friend of mine recently suggested, simply as a way to get even closer to me by connecting with one of my closest friends. And boy, was I tickled. I just saw Warren stateside about 2 weeks ago. His son Sam, now graduating from high school, and his bride of 25 years was there too. And Warren was still marveling about my dad's visit. Unfortunately, I somehow lost that email and the image attached to it, so I haven't seen that photo in years. Then I got an email from Warren's son Sam yesterday, telling me that he wanted to share his condolences, but also that he is the family photo archivist, and when he gets back to Poland later this summer, he's going to send me a copy. So my dad's generosity of spirit just continues to fan out into the world in myriad ways. And lo and behold, sometimes it even comes back to you. Now, as a young child, I thought my father was Superman. Doesn't every kid, after all? But of course, as you age, learn, and grow, you see the man begin to emerge from the myth. We all have to find our way in the world, and it was in my teenage years, as it was before for others and still is for countless kids since, you have to plant your own flag, forge a distinct identity, become your own person. Marcia and I both did this, but we didn't do it alone. In recent years, my sister and I have been reflecting on our upbringing as our parents' health was in decline, and we began to prepare for this day. At some point in the discussion, Marcia said to me, "You know, in a lot of ways, we kind of raised ourselves." And I thought about that for a bit, and I had to agree. But now, with my father's death, I think we have to amend that statement a little bit. And be clear, Marcia didn't say that because she felt either of us were neglected. On the contrary, I think she might have felt we raised ourselves because my dad was not prescriptive. Let me explain. Were we to make a mistake, he had a lot of questions about it, but rarely admonitions. Or when we were struggling with an issue in school, or our personal lives, or later our careers, there was never a simple, "Here's what I think you should do" type of response. There were just more questions. Was there a method to this madness? Of course, and it's nearly as old as Western civilization, and it's rooted in the Academy of Plato, and it is simply the Socratic method. Ask a probing question, make the respondent defend their position, and then ask another question, and another, and another. But never was it done to belittle or demean. The goal, of course, was to help us figure out an answer or a path on our own. So in a sense, we did kind of raise ourselves, but only with a very subtle form of guidance because our dad trusted us to have the intelligence, the perception, and the sensitivity to reach the right conclusion. In other words, to do the right thing. Do the right thing. Not for him, mind you, but for us, for ourselves. And of course, all of this was born of love. Would my dad have preferred I'd studied the law? Maybe. But when he knew that I wanted to pursue a career in commercial photography, if he had objected, he knew I'd probably rebel without a thought-out path, or even worse, possibly resenting him. But once I made my case, and he knew I was serious, he would ask, "Okay, Wymor, what are the next steps? How do you get there?" Did Marcia and I make mistakes? Without a doubt. Do we still make mistakes? You bet. Life, after all, is a work in progress. But here's the thing. My dad helped us to develop a set of critical thinking skills that has served us both pretty well as we've made our way in the world. And as new challenges present themselves, we have the tools necessary to have our own brainstorming sessions. And I find myself applying these same set of tools with friends who seek my counsel. I always start by saying, you know, the only requisite for giving good advice is that it doesn't apply to oneself. So I'll try and help you figure it out, just as he helped me figure it out. And sometimes I throw in a good old, my advice is worth what you paid for it, just for good measure. And I am certain my sister does the same thing with my nephew Adam, as well as her own life. And I am hopeful that she knows that she has an unconditional Socrates in her little brother at the drop of a hat. So thanks for those tools, Dad. Turns out you were Superman after all. So that's what I've learned from my dad. But frankly, it barely even scratches the surface. There was so much more, and certainly many of you have your own stories to tell about what you learned from him as well. I look forward over the few days that I am still here to hear you share your stories if you'd like. And they no doubt are nearly endless. So I guess the only thing I want to ask is that you continue his legacy. Share of yourself, engage with your fellow man, even if it means stepping out of your comfort zone. Treat others with kindness always and with a generosity of spirit, and help people discover their own path towards fulfilling themselves. Now, I know many of you had not seen my father in many years, and people have asked both me and Marcia if there was anything they could do over the past couple of years. And here's a thought I've had. Remember, Larry, how you knew him when he was at his best, at his peak, when he was still his essential self. And keep that person alive in your thoughts and actions going forward. It would honor him greatly, and I have no doubt help to make the world a better place. Now, I need to take a minute to single out the heroic efforts of my sister over the last couple of years. What she has done in taking care of my parents was nothing short of miraculous, because the mental toll that this illness extracts on loved ones is staggering. I had the luxury of observing most of it from a distance, while Marcia managed the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day. But frankly, it didn't make it any easier. But I can't let this moment pass without acknowledging her effort. Now I know she will say, hey, I was just doing what anyone would have done, but I have to disagree. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. Granted, there were times when my perspective gave me a much more philosophical view, and every once in a while, I found myself talking Marcia off the ledge, but we were always in agreement about how to move forward. And the fact that she got it done while managing a household, raising an incredible young man in Adam, and running a business is an achievement I can only be astonished by. She is a mensch. So I have to thank her publicly for everything. Marcia, thank you. Oh, and one more thing I learned from my dad before I forget. In 1974, when at the age of 9 and 12, he and my mom took us to see Blazing Saddles, our first ever R-rated film, what did I learn? I learned that Mel Brooks is one of, if not the funniest filmmakers to ever run film through a camera. I think my dad would have laughed at that. Finally, thank you all for coming, and thank you for remembering Larry. Seeing all these faces would have delighted him beyond measure, and so it delights me too. Thank you.
Let's rise for the memorial prayer. El mole rachamim shochen bamromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina b'malot kedoshim utehorim kazor akiyam azhirim et nishmat Eliezer ben Menachem shahalach lolamo Began Eden tehe menuchato. Ano bal harachamim hastirehu, but seter knafecha liolamim. Utzror bitzrechem et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanoch b'shalom hamishkavo, v'nomar amen. May we remember all of the worthy deeds that he performed in the land of the living. God is now his portion. May he rest in peace. And we all say amen. Let's be seated. We want to offer our condolences, of course, to the entire family, specifically to Marcia and to Stephen and to Adam. And Adam, you know what your grandpa said when he learned that you were born. It was the best day of his life. He told your mom. The family will receive friends at Marcia's residence, 3162 Lander Road, 3162 Lander Road. Immediately following the burial portion of the service, and the visitation today will be until 4 p.m., tomorrow evening 7 to 9 p.m., again on Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m., and again 7 to 9 p.m. on Sunday. We're going to pause in the ritual at this moment to allow us to arrange the processional, which will take us to the burial portion of the service. Please remain in your seats for another moment. The pallbearers, however, should now come forward.